You are gonna love Bobby. You know I was married.
I can't do this.
We're making a movie.
Where's that smile?
Stop. I love you.
Maybe it's not so terrible.
I'm in love with her.
What comes next?
Do it again.
Part of what we have all found so compelling about this story is that I think we all have in our heads this idea of, or we've all been told this story many times about the genius, the auteur, usually a man who creates these incredible works out of thin air. And, you know, it's such a persistent myth in our culture. You think about the heroic showrunner, the heroic director, and Fosse is certainly one of those people that, you know, whenever there's only a last name, you know that you're probably onto one of those people. But the more you look into his story, the more you realize that it's not fair to call his work Fosse alone. That if you sort of widen the lens just a little bit, you see that Gwen Verdon was there beside him, and her contribution to this work is immeasurable. And so I think in a moment where culturally we are reassessing, hopefully, some of that mythology and realizing the consequences of that mythology, and the kinds of corrosive effects that it can have, especially in the entertainment industry where we, you know, live, I think this story feels like a cautionary tale, and also a look at how these sorts of things get built and how they're maintained, and hopefully kind of picking apart a little bit at that mythology.
You are gonna love Bobby.
No, I know who he is. He's the one with the hats.
He does a lot more than hats.
He's only choreographed one show.
Slouch the shoulders.
Slouch. I don't think I've ever heard that word from a choreographer before.
One of the really interesting things about their relationship is that for a long time, almost the entirety of their relationship, Bob was jealous of Gwen. Gwen was the one who got the attention. What people don't know today is that Gwen was a superstar. Gwen was the best dancer on Broadway. This is when Broadway was really, you know, American pop culture. And Bob was a choreographer and director, and nobody cared about certainly choreographers and very much directors too. And so there is a moment at which that switched, and she got left behind and he got elevated. And I do think it has to do with gender, it has to do with age, and the way it intersects with gender. And interestingly, Gwen herself was part of maintaining that mythology and burnishing that legacy. And that's one of the more interesting parts of the story.
Can you talk about working with Nicole Fosse, like as a consultant on the show, and what that's been like? And yeah, it's interesting that she doesn't seem to have any illusions about her parents' relationship.
Yeah.
Well, it's not only interesting that she doesn't have illusions about her parents' relationship, but it's an incredible sign of who she is as a person. I mean, we should all have open eyes about all the people in our lives, but it's extraordinary that she's so open about hers and really generous that she's been open with us so that we can all work together to create this show. You know, I think there's specific stuff that she's brought, of course, access to the Fosse Verdon Legacy Project that's allowed us to recreate all the dances, family photographs and archival materials that have allowed us to recreate sets and recreate wardrobe. But the greatest thing she's brought is that honesty about her childhood and that unique perspective that she brought from having grown up with these people and experienced them as parents and watched them day in and day out. And that's allowed us to take as authentic an approach as we possibly can with these characters.
Everyone see what Gwen's doing with the arms?
Break the legs.
Or this? Now what?
I don't know.
Part one, she has a tremendous amount of musical theater experience. I mean, she starred as Sally Bowles on Broadway, right? Mm-hmm. So she's done the job. Two, both she and Sam have worked incredibly hard, and for a long, long time before this show ever started shooting, they worked on their dancing and they worked on all other aspects of the character. And three, and probably most importantly, although it's true that Gwen Verdon was one of the greatest dancers in history, ultimately, this is a show about Gwen Verdon, the human being, and Gwen Verdon's marriage, and Gwen Verdon as a mother, and Gwen Verdon as an artist struggling to find how she was going to express herself in the world. But it's not a story about her dance. It's a story about her life.
This is your first project as a showrunner, correct?
Yeah, well, yes, we try not to use that word, because I think, unlike a Bob Fosse production where there was one, at least on the page, one undisputable king of the project, this really has been a collaboration with Tommy and Joel and me, I think, from the beginning, and so. But yes, this is my first time as an executive producer.
I'll say two things about that. One, fantastic executive producer and fantastic partner. And also, it's funny, we were talking earlier that in many ways, the whole process of this production has been an expression of the antithesis of the way Bob Fosse mounted shows. There was always, in a Bob Fosse production, a lot of drama, a lot of conflict, a lot of teeth gnashing, and I think we've tried to proceed with a lot of collaboration, a lot of openness, a lot of listening, and
it's hard enough as it is. I mean, it's really hard to make something that to add that just feels like, God, why? And I think we all philosophically feel like you don't have to be miserable to make something great.
And it's better not to be miserable. I know that's a controversial thing to say, but I'll say also, in success, there's enough credit to go around, and in failure, nobody really cares.
There is this sort of reputation, though, as like, and I'm not saying you guys are this, but it's like tortured artists that make great work.
Right.
Do you think that's a real thing, or is that sort of like a myth that we've built up around a few people?
I think there's some reality and some myth to that. I think the myth is that the torture has to extend to others. And I think the reality is, yes, all of us who are doing this have a level of obsession. Mm-hmm. We're all up at night. We're all up in the middle of the night. We're all up at all hours. We all turn in the script and then want to scramble and grab the file back because we thought of another rewrite. We all come out of the editing room thinking about how we can make better even after it's done. So there's an endless obsession, and you can either choose to work in supportive collaboration with others and feed each other's obsession that way, or you can work against one another and feed the obsession that way.
Yeah, Bob, it's so fascinating. One of the great privileges of doing the show has been getting to meet some of these legends and have an excuse to interview them about this. But Hal Prince, who's one of the great Broadway directors and producers, was talking to us about Bob and saying that there are certain artists that he's worked with, and Bob Fosse and Michael Bennett, who did Chorus Line, came to mind, as people who could only do their best work in a state of chaos. And they created that around them. Like, they sort of unconsciously made things miserable because that's how they could work best. But I do think it's up to the sane people to not encourage that, and to not say that it has to be that way. I think one of the things in our show is we do have other artists who come in and out of this story who did not have miserable lives, and who did not need drugs, and who didn't, have endless affairs, and were still quite successful and quite gifted. Yeah, no, I think
it is. I think it is. I think there's a real resurgence, which I'll say for people like us who were drawn into this business because of a passion for theater and musical theater, it's pretty exciting to see people getting on the train.
It's true.
How about this?
So what do I wear underneath?
How about,
Nothing underneath.
I do really love Mein Herr in Cabaret. I think is pretty astonishing. And it was actually amazing to get to see that on set, recreated in person, because it's so much harder looking in person and so much scarier looking. And you realize, like, the woman who was choreographing it, she was one of Bob Fosse's dancers, was talking to them about, like, be careful, you're right on the edge of the stage. And you realize, like, these dances are so hard to do, and, like, they're actually standing on chairs, and, like, it looks so easy in the movie, and it looks like, oh, they must have had some kind of trick chair or something. But they don't. It's just a chair that they managed not to break their neck on.
No, in fact, actually, Andy Blankenbuehler, who was helping with the choreography on that, did order one special chair, which was for the main actress, because the moves are so acrobatic and athletic that there's a danger the chair will just collapse.
Yeah.
So we had to have a metal version of the wooden chair made so
That's
that it
right.
wouldn't just collapse underneath the dancer.
And to do that night after night, 10 shows a week or whatever.
Right.
Insane.
Well, that's, yeah. superhuman. And those dancers and actors back then did not miss shows, is something we have learned. Like, that was considered hugely humiliating to call out of a show. Now most people on Broadway call out like once a week in a long-running show, but like Chita Rivera, she never called out, you know? Gwen Verdon did call out, but that speaks more to Gwen Verdon.
Again?